What insights do you have looking into your own investment future? Like, what are you taking away from being a broker?
Don't bite the hand that feeds you. I think that's the biggest thing. Eventually I'd like to be on, the purchase side of things and grow and own a larger portfolio of real estate personally. And I think a key to that is having relationships with good brokers. The types of deals that we're finding and selling, not everybody necessarily has access to. And I think that souring a relationship with brokers is a good way to not find yourself in the correct place to get the right deals.
Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm Tom Shellcross. With me, as always, is Mark Ainley. Mark, how you doing over there?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out over the weekend what episode you started really coming in hot and heavy with the welcome part, because there was a point where we didn't early on the first episode. So at some point we thought, this is great. Let's just start yelling.
We should do a full 50-minute interview in that voice, just screaming at our guest.
I told in that voice, you know how on you go on YouTube, you could take like any annoying sound and just listen to it for 10 hours. Like I thought like that'd be funny. Like my son's like, you should put that together where you should put it on YouTube. You get 10 hours of welcome, just over and over and over again. It just loops it for 10 hours.
Or you walk into like, a 7-Eleven or a liquor store, you hear the ding every time the door opens, just the welcome every time.
Yeah, that'd be hilarious.
Man, we got a young guy today.
We do. And I think, I've been having a lot of, I don't know if it's coincidental, but a lot of people, even like just out of high school, reaching out, asking questions, asking about mentorship, asking how to get in the game. And this is very relevant for a lot of them, but it's also relevant for people that, are in their 20s, 30s that are still looking to get rid of the W-2 job, be in real estate full time and figure out a way to transition. Because, there's working your W-2 job that maybe doesn't have something you went to school for. And it's just, you're doing it to earn a living. But then there's all these opportunities in real estate, whether it be working for a brokerage, doing property management, working at a title company. Like there's just so much opportunity to be in real estate without and still have a salary.
Yeah, and it's just uncomfortable because you haven't done that before, or it's a pay cut, right? And no one wants to do that. Just look at the immediate gratification of what you're receiving today.
Yeah, I talked to a guy the other day. He actually went from 144,000 working a job that had nothing to do with real estate, nothing to do with what he went to school for, to go work for a lender. He wasn't going to do loan. He was going to basically be the lender's like EA, basically, in a way, just so he could learn everything on that side. And he was going to cut down to like 75,000. So there's people that want to take that jump. He was very miserable in his day-to-day job where I think it was less about money and more about quality of life. But there's those moments in life, if that's where you want to be, there's just it's usually happiness is right around the corner of a tough decision.
Yeah, that's a good saying. It's also, you could always go back, right? If it doesn't work out, like, all right, cool, go work where you were, a competitor or whatever, like that opportunity's still there. Like, if not, then you have bigger issues.
Yeah, that was how it was for me. I mean, I was much younger, and I was only making whatever 50 grand working at a trucking company. But like, transportation is not going away. There's a million trucking companies out there. I could probably go make 50 grand anywhere, anytime if real estate doesn't work out.
Yeah. All right. So what do we got for our housing buyer tip of the week?
All right. So one thing that I'm seeing happen here in the suburbs. So I think it's 123 of the suburbs have rental license programs, and a lot of them actually have full blown inspections where the city will come out and walk through your property. One thing that the cities are getting smart to, and a couple in particular are Streamwood and Glendale Heights and Hanover Park, is if you get a hot water heater in that previous year, or maybe you got it while you're living there and you get a permit, they get you for it. And they say, hey, you got to get a permit. So you have to pay a licensed plumber to go and get a permit. And, it should cost $350, and the city will come out and inspect it then. So if you are in one of those cities, Schaumburg does it too, and the city's going to be walking through, and they get you on the hot water heater for two reasons. One, the install date is usually right, not the manufacturing date is right on the side. And it's really hard to look past the brand new copper coming out the top of it. So I actually know a guy that he scruffed up it to try to avoid getting the permits to make it look older. And he wiped off the date on the side. He's trying to beat the system. But yeah, so keep that in mind when you're in the suburbs. They're starting to find money opportunities by getting you for not having permits, and they'll actually make you go back and do the process again.
Yeah. All right. Let's bring our guest in today. So I've known our guest now for probably about 3 or 4 years, know him from the brokerage side, and have kept in touch and walked a few buildings. And since then has grown and started his own portfolio. He's taken on a ton of units on the property management side. and all at the age of 25, just done a ton in the Chicago real estate market already. So without further ado, we have the VP of Triton Realty, Director over at Harbor Property Groups, James Thompson. Welcome to the show.
Wonderful. Tom, Mark, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're pumped to have you. So for our listeners, we've had two of your colleagues on. 𝗏𝘃𝗀𝗏 was early on, episode 22. Man, that was 4 years ago. And then we also had Harry on episode 211. So for those who don't know Triton Realty, two great guys that we've already had on. James, you're the third, but go back and listen to those episodes. They're good. And don't be too critical of episode 22. That was a while ago. We were getting our act together.
I think Matt was talking about Logan Square on his his predictions for Logan Square. So we can go back and check and see if those came true or not.
Yeah, there you go. We can hold his feet to the fire here 4 years later. So, well, we recorded that episode with 𝗏𝘃𝗀𝗏 in 2020. You just started as an intern there in 2019. Is that correct?
Yeah. So to kind of give my background and my story, growing up, my grandfather was a carpenter by trade. And so he owned properties and was, managed his properties himself. My grandma was his bookkeeper. So growing up, I always heard little anecdotes and stories about his properties in Minneapolis. One of them actually was torn down to build a new Viking stadium. So, I always had an interest in real estate, went to UW-Madison, studied real estate, and then met Matt 𝗏𝘃𝗀𝗏 through actually his brother-in-law was a fraternity brother of mine. And he told me to, reach out to him. So came down on a Wednesday in my junior year of college and decided to move down to Chicago for the summer between junior and senior year, and then ended up staying with Matt and the Triton team and realizing that's, kind of what I wanted to do long term.
Before that introduction, I know you said your dad was a carpenter. Was real estate was it, hey, this is what I'm going to do with my life? Or was it still, hey, I'm 20 years old figuring this out?
I can't, every time you say that, I can't help but think like his dad's Jesus. I know, like both times I'm like, oh, Jesus.
It was my grandfather. So my dad was an air traffic controller in Minneapolis. It was my grandfather. So he was, by the time, I was hearing these stories, he had already sold his properties and, was retired and everything. But at Christmas or whenever we get around with them, I'd always hear the stories of his crazy tenants. He was a bit of a slumlord, for lack of a better word. Didn't have a lot of money, so he liked to help out the people that were maybe a little bit on the lower end of tenants.
What were you going to school for?
I studied real estate at UW-Madison, but it's more. Wow. It's more designated towards like working for a like a big real estate conglomerate, doing like portfolio management for Blackstone or whoever else. So most of the jobs would be downtown, sitting in an office, not necessarily being on the field and actually hands-on with real estate. And after doing that internship, and traveling, meeting owners, going around with Matt and touring properties and walking buildings, I realized that, that being on the ground and actually hands-on with the real estate was something that was important to me. So I think that's kind of when that change in trajectory came out.
All right. So when you first came to Chicago, give us your initial thoughts of the city.
I mean, I'm from the south suburbs in Minneapolis, and then went to UW-Madison, which is a smaller town. So moving here, definitely a little change of pace. See a lot of things that I have never seen before. And it's, just a little bit of adapting, kind of learning how to navigate the big city versus, suburbs life.
There you go. All right. So talk to me a little about that first year. I think, a lot of our listeners, they interact with residential brokers. They don't realize on the commercial side, just the grind, right? The amount of phone calls that it takes, just the amount of digging, the amount of scraping, like, talk to us about just some of those tasks the first year and just some of those. I'm sure you had some struggles there. So let's share some of those.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a grind. It's all about hitting the phones, getting in contact with people, staying in front of people. It's a lot about timing. So I think that's a big part about it, is getting enough touches on people to make sure you don't miss the time. But, a lot of the time is building out a database, doing research on the different areas, seeing what is sold, what kind of real estate it is, demographic of the area, and then just putting together, a database of owners and start calling. I think that, you know, starting out in real estate, it's challenging because the people you're talking to are, you know, much older and have a lot more money than you do. And so it's hard to, you know, hard to relate sometimes. But yeah, I'd say that, you know, just building the database and getting started is really the toughest part.
Well, how did you relate though? Because there's definitely that fake it till you make it type skill that you have to, a muscle that you have to build. Because you can't come in there and start talking about owning buildings or the problems they have with their kids or their wives or any of that type of stuff. Because that's usually who the owners are. And I'm curious to hear like what faking it till you made it look like for you and more of a tactic.
You're 21 and been in the city for a few months, right? Like it's not.
Yeah. Exactly. It's hard to talk about what that corner used to be 20 years ago when you've been here for 3 months. So, you know, and a lot of the owners in the Chicagoland area are very part of the neighborhood and live in the neighborhood. So they know a lot of details, and it's hard to fake it till you make it because it's pretty obvious if you don't have that information. But I think a big part of, you know, the initial success is one, the timing. 2020 was a really good year for real estate sales. So that worked out in my favor. Interest rates were still low. Buildings were trading, but then also just having the mentorship of Matt and the other guys here at Triton. Matt owns some real estate. And so, you know, I'd be able to reference those buildings. And I had a hand in management of those properties from the start. And so, you know, I'd be able to reference those and, you know, kind of refer to them as the properties are properties, even though, you know, I really wasn't an owner of them. But, you know, I think that part of it, having some older mentors to point you in the right direction.
Yep. When you first got started, were you focused on specific neighborhoods?
Yeah. So I was focused primarily on the Northwest side, kind of Foster as the north side down to Fullerton, maybe a little south of Fullerton in some areas, and then from Kimball, you know, kind of as far west from there, as Chicago goes. So those were my initial neighborhoods. You know, sold a few properties in Belmont-Cragen and Portage Park my first year, and then, you know, slowly from there, I've taken on a larger role on the management side, but continued making my calls and everything in those neighborhoods.
Yep. All right. So talk to us about, give us a heartbreak deal. Give us one you worked on for a long time and you just saw someone else scooped up the listing or he found a friend. Like, give us that one. I know you got it.
There's one example that comes to mind it's really a testament of making sure that you're actually communicating with the correct party and the decision maker. I had a deal. It's actually up here on the north side, pretty close to our office here at Triton. And it was 2 courtyard buildings. I think we had agreed on somewhere around like $5.5 million for the 2 properties. And, you know, negotiated out, there was a large prepayment penalty on the loan that was going to be assumed. So we had to negotiate out that. And we had basically gotten every single point negotiated upon, at least I had thought. Sent them the contract. They said, make this little edit and then we'll sign it. Resent them with the edit and did not hear back for about 6 months from the seller. And it's like, okay, well, what happened here? And it turns out that the person that I was discussing with, you know, didn't have the ability to sell the property and was not on the same page with the owner about, you know, the terms of the deal. So he was making decisions that he didn't have the ability to make.
That's rough. So now not only you lose the deal, you know, you have that lined up, you lose some faith in the buyer, right? Like that's, you know, he's blaming you on this. Like, hey, what the hell happened to my deal?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, everybody was pretty disappointed at the end of it. We probably were in discussion with them for about 6 months working on this deal. We walked the building maybe 2-3 times. They opened everything up, showed us the whole property. And yeah, so it's kind of one of those times where you're like, why would you go through this whole exercise of wasting everybody's time essentially? But that's
how do you prevent that? I mean, this is valuable for wholesalers out there too, that, you know, a lot of things get passed along or daisy chain.
I really think that it's important to ask that question, and it's an awkward question to ask. I think it's uncomfortable when you're talking with somebody to be like, are you really the person to talk to? And I think it depends on how you ask it to make it respectful. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. And if somebody's just going to lie through their teeth and say that they have the ability to make these decisions, there's not a lot you can do about that.
I know we do it with on the property management side. If there's like a red flag, maybe it's a trust or something like that, or we're not sure who's gonna be able to sign for it, but we'll say something along the lines of like, hey, there's gonna be a bunch of stuff that anyone that's got ownership interest here is gonna have to sign. I just want to make sure that you or whoever else can be prepared. And usually they'll start talking at that point of like, oh, I gotta get my Aunt Susie and stuff like that. So we kind of make it look like they're gonna have to come to the table with those people in the near future. Because I hate that question.
Okay.
That's awkward. I hate when they get asked that question.
Yeah.
Like on a pitch, like, hey, is there someone else who's gonna? I know what you mean by it. It is awkward, so I've tried to reframe it.
There you go.
Absolutely.
All right, give us one of those good wins too now, right? One of those guys it took 22 phone calls to get.
Yeah, I think that there was one deal in particular. It was on Whipple Street, and it actually wasn't in that neighborhood that I was working necessarily. An owner owned a property there and also owned one in a different neighborhood. And I brought Matt to the deal, and he had a buyer for it. And we walked the property together. Turned out that the seller and the buyer actually had a pretty good relationship already. And so me and Matt essentially stepped out of the way, their buddies, so that they communicated on the deal and did all the inspections and everything, the appraisal. We kind of got to sit back, and they closed 3 months later and sent us our check. So that's probably the easiest win that we'll all have in brokerage. But it's good to get one of those after a few of the heartbreak stories.
Law of averages, man. That's what it always breaks down to with real estate deals. Some of those gimme ones are just like kind of like payback for all the ones that you struggle with or never got to the finish table.
Yeah, those are also the ones that when somebody hears that story, they go, well, commercial real estate's super easy. You just make a couple calls and you get a big check. And it's like, well, you got to go through a lot of pain and suffering to get a couple of those easy ones to fall.
Sure thing.
Man, looking back on it, what were some of the things that did not know? I mean, there's a lot of things you've learned, but some big ticket items you didn't know 3-4 years ago that now you feel like, oh, I'm very confident talking about this. And where my head is going with this is tuck pointing, boilers, how to run expenses, NOI, like any of those things, because you see it every day and live it every day. I'm assuming you had zero to minimal experience coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of give the background on, because I do brokerage with Triton, and about 2 years ago we started Harbor Property Management to manage the buildings that Triton, people affiliated with Triton own. And so I took over a larger role on the management side and handle a lot of the day-to-day management. Ended up getting my GC license a couple of years ago, and able to pull permits. So we've done, I've been very hands-on with pretty large scale construction now. A lot of value add renovations. I think last summer we did close to 60 apartments in being renovated. So it's having that knowledge and knowing what it costs to do construction. I think that that's been really helpful, and kind of like going back to the fake it till you make it. When I make a call to an owner now, I understand the ins and outs of the day-to-day operations of a building. I understand how to walk a building and look at, where we're going to have to spend money if we're purchasing it or if we're, looking at it for a sale. So I think that knowledge has made me come off a lot more intelligent on the phone and when dealing with people, and providing, being able to provide value to them as well. Like for example, I was talking to a client who owns a building in Hermosa, and got a violation on his porch. And I was able to put him in touch with our porch guy, and our porch guy's quote was half of what the next best quote he had. And he ended up going forward with them, knocked it out in a week. He was super happy. And it's like things like that might lead to eventually, if he sells that building, I'm guessing he'll give me the call versus, another broker that might just call him every 6 months.
Well, you know you're gonna get a bunch of calls or messaging now for your Porsche guy, so just be ready.
Nobody else can have them.
Talked about getting your GC license. What did you just go through the city of Chicago? Like, what did you do to get that in place?
Paid your parking
I mean,
tickets.
it's pretty easy. It's a form online that you have to fill out. You're not, the GC license doesn't. There's no like test involved with it. You still have to use all of the subs for pulling their specific permits. So like the electric permit and the plumbing permit, those all need to be done with a licensed sub attached to it. So it was pretty simple online. It just gives us really the ability.
Yeah, what motivated you to do it? What's the advantage of having it versus not? I have mine. I just wanted to share with people. Like,
yeah, I think the control of the construction process. We've gotten all of our trades kind of lined up, and when from a financial standpoint, doing it ourselves and not having to pay a third party company a GC fee, that makes it more feasible to do construction. Being able to pull the permits ourselves and do things by the books, I think is also good too. If you just hire a handyman and don't have that ability to kind of do things properly in the city.
yeah, I think when you have to start putting contractors or general contractors or any contractors on your city permits, like you lose control over that, and the contractors know that, and because it's such a pain in the butt to go change some of that stuff, or you don't want to deal with it. So I think controlling your destiny is the biggest value there.
Absolutely. And I've realized since then we started working on a building while, going through the permit process, and got a stop work order from the city. And so I think after that, and just the amount of time and energy that goes into, fixing that problem, it's not really worth it. So making sure we do things by the books.
Yeah, there's the emotional tax to it, and now it's also more expensive. It used to just be the $1,000 fine, and now this year they changed it. I forgot what the percentage was, but it's before it used to be like, all right, $1,000. Like
the biggest factor for us, to be honest, is the time. I mean, you get a stop work order, it's might be 60, 90 days before you're able to remove it, and the scope of work probably is going to increase. The holding costs of the loan is going to increase, and those things add up, and there's something that a lot of times aren't budgeted for on the front end.
yeah, and you might miss your season then, right? It might take you from the July finish date to October or whatever. And it's like, all right, we missed the season. Great, here we are.
A lot of the properties that we manage are down in Hyde Park. We have 6 buildings in the Hyde Park area. And that rental market is very, very specific to the summer months. People are really only moving while school is out. There's not a whole lot of movement while the kids are in school at UChicago. So if you finish a construction project in December, you're going to be sitting vacant. Most likely, you either need to take a non-student tenant, or take leave the building vacant for several months until students are going to be moving again.
Yep. So when we had Harrison on, he gave a very good description of just kind of the ins and outs of student housing down there. Give us the high level. What are some things that you've learned that for someone like myself who doesn't have any student housing but is familiar with the game, what are some things that are different in that area compared to, having a 10 unit in Portage Park?
Yeah. I think that the communication and just kids, they haven't rented apartments before. They were living at home and then in student housing with the university, and then it's their first time. So a lot of people, it's a lot more coaching on and teaching on the management side of how things need to be communicated, what needs to be done, what is and isn't acceptable behavior, all of that. And so the communication is probably the most difficult part. Especially they're larger units for the most part down there. So you've got 4 roommates, and usually like to try to pick one as like the point of contact, that the person that will actually respond to the messages and communicate with their roommates. But that's been an interesting part. And it's also, you don't know that, you're not sure how good of a relationship the students have with each other. So you rent out a 2-bed to a family, that the husband and wife or whatever are communicating to each other. The students might not communicate. So you might think you have communicated with the unit, by sending one of them a message, but might not necessarily be the case.
Parents too, I imagine you have co-signers and stuff like that with some of that they have to
Oh,
go
yeah.
back and forth on.
Yeah, co-signers definitely. That's been a big factor. The university also has student loans, pretty good student loans and like grants and stuff. So a lot of the students in that area have some sort of loan payment loan payment that's going towards their rent.
And you know what sucks about first time renters is they've never experienced a shitty landlord, or they've never experienced a lack of landlord doesn't communicate, and they just their assumptions of what that process should be, and especially if they're paying it for themselves, that's probably one of their largest first largest like expenses. And man, we actually ding it on our matrix just because we know it's that much more difficult in their expectations, what they expect to be.
Yeah, and it's amazing, like both sides of that spectrum are pretty crazy. Like there'll be tenants that are texting you every, send me 5 messages in a row for something that's, very unurgent issue. And they're like, why is nobody responding to me? It's Saturday at 8 p.m. and I've sent 4 texts. Why is nobody getting back to me? And then, there's the other end of it where you'll have a student that's like, oh, I didn't realize I was supposed to put in a maintenance request when, the toilet's been running for a week. It's like, okay, well, when something breaks, you gotta let us know so we can get in there and fix it.
Well, here's a housing provider tip, I guess. I'm going to screw up these numbers a little, but we went a couple years ago. We went back like 5 years, and we figured all of our 311 calls, and it wasn't crazy over that period of time. I think it was we're only able to track it back to like 12 or something like that. And of those 12, I think it was like 10 of them were first time renters because right away, again, they can't get a hold of you on Saturday at 9 o'clock on a holiday weekend. They call 311.
Yeah.
So that's the other risk that you have when if you don't get back to them, they go and they want something, they try to figure out what to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So talk to us a little about just growing the management side of this. Is this where you see you're going to spend more time in the future? Are you going to jump back into more brokerage? Like, what's the ideal situation for you?
Yeah. So, I did not think I would be managing properties when I first came onto the team. I started out and I was helping with Matt with the lease up of a property in Hyde Park. It was supposed to be done with the construction when I was graduating school, and then ended up kind of stepping in and taking over more of the finishing the construction and making sure that got done. And so that kind of spiked my interest in, being on the management side of things. But really, since we got to a point of management where a few of the guys in the office were doing their own things, and it just made sense to put it under one umbrella and create more systems and efficiencies in the way that we go about managing the buildings. And so I'd like to, I took on a large role in that just because the other guys that we were working with had a lot more experience in brokerage and weren't willing to do so. And so I plan on going back and being more full-time on the brokerage side. But I'm really trying to create systems in place and get people in the right position to make the management side just less time intensive.
Got it. Do you have you don't have to share if you don't want to, some horror stories on the management side? What are some good ones to share?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, there's a lot of horror stories in Chicago. As I said earlier, a lot of things I did not think I would ever see. But one in particular was a building down in Woodlawn, right next to the University of Chicago. We were under contract to purchase it. The building was falling apart. We had to do a full renovation. And we got all the leases. There were a couple of units that were vacant, and we closed on the building, went to go introduce myself to the residents, and the owners didn't walk every single unit during their inspection under contract. So they weren't exactly sure what, the demographic of the residents looked like. And the owner, or the previous owner, had actually rented out on a cash deal one of the apartments to a known gang affiliate and drug dealer. And so I knocked on the door, started opening up the door, thinking the apartment's supposed to be vacant, and get greeted by some drug dealer that was like, "Nope, I live here and I'm not leaving." And so we ended up, I'm like, all right, well, what am I going to do about that? Not really anything I can do. So we ended up having to pay him cash for keys. And it was, a couple $1,000s later, he gave us the keys back and went on to terrorize another landlord.
Man, it's so simple though. Like cash can solve most problems.
Yeah.
Whether you give
really
a leak,
does.
you fix your bad tenant, like cash can solve most problems.
It's amazing. And it feels so wrong handing a cashier's check to a drug dealer and get the keys back. But sometimes, you got to do what you got to do. So another resident in that building that we had ended up having a mental health episode. Started to do some drugs and had a little bit of a freak out. And she destroyed every inch of her apartment, broke all the glass, ended up throwing a TV out the window. And so we had to, call the police and have her taken to the hospital. And then, it was about $20,000 worth of repairs that were needed in order to get that unit back up and running.
So she just go to the hospital and come home, or did you have to like wait for her to get released? Like, because I know we've had that before where someone actually had a freak out like that. And then it was like the wrong call to call the police because they ended up going to a psych ward for like 6 months. And we had it was a horrible trying to get them out.
So you had to keep the unit available for them during those?
Well, all their stuff was in there technically.
Yeah.
It's like same thing when someone passed away, you got to like wait for the whole family and it's crazy.
Yeah. For that one, so it was an unfortunate situation. But there was kind of one good side was that the resident that actually lived there and who was on the lease, it was his like girlfriend that had the freak out. And so she technically wasn't on the lease for the unit. But I did, when the police were there and they take her to the hospital, I asked him, I'm like, can we like trespass this lady? I mean, she had a full breakdown and like, scared the crap out of all the other residents that lived there. And they said no. They're like, if you go and change the locks or don't allow her back here, it would be then illegal on your end. So luckily, I don't think that I think that she's still in there. But and he decided to vacate the apartment. So we just he gave us the keys back. We canceled the lease and he moved out. So
in a situation like, can you do insurance claiming that? Because I'm seeing landlords get more creative with what they can file claims on.
If it was a newly renovated unit and she did a bunch of damage, we probably would have. The fact that we were going to have to go in and do updates to the apartment already, it was just kind of increasing the amount of updates. It wasn't worth going in and filing an insurance report.
Yep. Also, do you guys take security deposits down there? I know security deposits are very hard with the RTLO. Or RLTO, I should say. I always get those two confused.
We don't hold any security deposits whatsoever. I've heard too many horror stories of it being handled incorrectly and people getting sued. So we don't. We do a move-in fee, and then a big part about that, that situation obviously is kind of a one-off, but with the students and whatnot, and they have their co-signers. So if there's any damage to the unit, whatever, we just send a bill, and then usually the parents are just going to pay the bill versus have us send it to collections or something along those lines. So the key there is just communicating with the residents, setting the expectations of how you'd like the unit left, if it's okay. Because a lot of them, as we were saying, are first time renters and, haven't really experienced the move in and move out of an apartment before.
I've seen, and we've been charging a lot more for the non-refundable. You obviously are allowed to go up to 49% of 1 month's rent. But 4 or 5 years ago, maybe not even that long ago, it was just usually a $500 type fee. Like, what are you guys doing these days for the amount?
So we do $400 for the first person, and then $250 for everybody after that, everybody over 18 that's on the lease. And then we've started, which is maybe a landlord tip for you. We've started offering an incentive of if they apply for the apartment within 24 hours of touring it, then we'll reduce that $400 down to $250. So provides a little bit of incentive for the them to apply quickly after the tour.
Gotcha. What are you doing, Tom?
So on the bigger units, I'll do like $750, $800. This is if it's $3-4 grand in rent type of thing. I'll do that. And if it's more like a typical Portage Park 600, I
Yes,
don't go crazy on it.
so we got a couple 12, 13, like on the $3,000-$4,000 units. We've been going up as high as, I think the highest one I saw last week was like 1,600. So
You could, right? Like I don't. You definitely could.
but it's got to play into, I mean, that's cash flow it's a huge expense. So I know we've been using it as an adjustment of, instead of dropping the price, we'll drop that. So if we need to.
What do you use as the justification? Because a lot of times, like people will ask me, now, if there's a lot of painting and turnover work that needs to be done, there's obviously a few things you could throw out there. But if you're charging a $1,600 move-in fee and you just have to do a quick clean of the unit, maybe touch up some paint, if somebody asks what it goes towards, are you providing any justification for it, or is that just is what it is?
Well, I know in Cook County you have to justify the fees. In Chicago, you don't have to break it down, but we do actually break it down. I'm not sure, I couldn't answer you 100% how we do that, but we do have a system for how we do that. But we do have them all
Okay.
over the place as far as what they are. Just based, it's not, our owners don't necessarily dictate it, but depending on the areas or whatnot, us trying to make sure, at the same time, we have to be competitive. So if everyone else in the South Loop or the HOA has a bunch of fees on the North Shore or something like that, it's really hard to jam them for to kind of maximize the, I say opportunity, but you maximize your risk reduction when the HOA charged $1,000 to move in. So we kind of do an analysis each time.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So knowing what you know now, working on the management side, what would you tell someone who's that 23-year-old looking to get started? They want to get in real estate. They don't know what to do. They just know they've read BiggerPockets. They listen to this podcast. They want in. They haven't figured it out. Like what advice would you give kind of just recently going through all this?
I think that just getting started and putting yourself out there is number one. Go to some of the networking stuff, listen to the podcast, tap into BiggerPockets. I think that's, getting out there and taking a look at it and trying to associate with like-minded people, other people that are talking about real estate. Is the key, but I think just get out there and do it. Like when I 2 years ago purchased a 3-unit property on my own in Wicker Park, and I was freshly out of college, and it was extremely scary. I had a little bit of experience on the management side, but it was value add property, and I didn't know exactly what I was getting myself into. So I think just moving forward, purchase it and take it as it goes.
As a broker, what insights do you have kind of looking into your own investment future? Like what are you taking away from being a broker to your own?
Don't bite the hand that feeds you. I think that's the biggest thing. Eventually I'd like to be on, the purchase side of things and grow and own a a larger portfolio of real estate personally. And I think a key to that is having relationships with good brokers. The types of deals that we're finding and selling, not everybody necessarily has access to. And I think that, souring a relationship with brokers is a good way to not find yourself in the correct place to get the right deals.
I like that answer. What about the outlook on Chicago?
I think, Chicago has its good parts and its bad parts. It's kind of a crazy city, but I think generally long term, it's going to continue being steady. I think my long-term outlook is pretty positive. I think the biggest risks are with the taxes and the political climate. But I think that also reduces some of the demand and can lead to, actually better deals, having some of that inherent risk of the city. So I've talked to, on the brokerage side of things, quite a few owners that purchased buildings around 2010, 2012, 14, whatever. And they've owned a few in Chicago, and they're like, I'm not planning on purchasing here anymore due to some of those factors. I think that is another opportunity that I'd be able to look at. So
it's crazy. I was listening to some other of our old shows, and that and as long as this podcast has been around, those have been like, oh, you gotta look out for taxes, you gotta look out for the political climate and whatever it might be. and that has that's been going on for 25, 30 years. Those same, like even par before we've been around. Like, so, and there's people that bothers them so much they can't do it, which is an opportunity, I think, for the rest of us. That just means there's less competition. If we didn't scare away some of those people, those are deals that the people here that know how to work the system, work it into their buying strategy. Those are deals that they would lose if those people stuck around. So, you know what, if you can't take it, you can't take the heat out of the kitchen, right? But leave the rest of it for us. We'll throw our heat suit on.
Yeah, I think another thing too is there's so much real estate in Chicago. Like going back in, you know, I was back in Minneapolis for the 4th of July, and there's just not as many small buildings. You know, there's so many streets lined with 2 flats, 3 flats. You know, smaller multifamily buildings too, and there's a lot of options out there. So,
well, I think
that's different in a lot of cities.
What you said is something I actually mentioned at our Grit Series event we just did this past Saturday. Was somebody asked me a question about population, and one of the things I always say, and you kind of proved it here, is the kids from all the colleges, Purdue, Madison, Iowa, all the colleges here in Chicago, U of I, ISU. They come here afterwards. Some of them stay forever. Some of them go out to the suburbs. Some of them go back home. But it ends up being the stopping point for a decade of people's lives. That's one of the kind of engines of the city of new people coming through.
I mean, from personally, I think from like my friend group in college, maybe 10 of us moved to Chicago. Not one of us from Illinois or the Chicagoland area. You know, New York, Boston, California, Minnesota, several. I mean, it's all kind of funneled back to leaving Wisconsin and going to Chicago. So I think you're absolutely right.
Also, a reminder, Chicago, just population wise, you mentioned the inventory, which is one of the biggest assets. Like, it's house hacking city here, all the 3 units, all the 4 units, but also like we forget Chicago is as big as Denver, Boston, Milwaukee, Nashville, and Salt Lake City combined. Like, those are 5 major metros, and we have the same population as all of those combined, right? Like, there's opportunity, right? There might be some parts you would never touch and whatever, but like, there's opportunity. It's like going to like those 5 cities and being like, oh, I can't find anything here. It's like, well, at some point the problem's you.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was in Nashville last year, and driving around, it's like there's a lot of cranes in the city and a lot of stuff getting built, but it's all, you know, it's all $50 million, you know, large multifamily developments and mixed use developments. And it's like, you know, a 26-year-old trying to buy something on his own isn't going to find, you know, necessarily the same amount of opportunity in a city like that that's building more dense and not having these kind of neighborhood style developments.
Yeah. I was asked what the biggest risk is, and I said this at the event, and then I thought about it over the weekend, is rent control. I think every year, you know, we knock it down, and I never really think any of us realize how big of a bullet that is we're going to dodge. So when that, I think all the other things that we could say, taxes, government, all that stuff, if none of those would probably be as relevant as if rent control comes in, and what a game changer that will end up being.
It's remarkable how many times we've got to vote that one down. But St. Paul, I keep referring back to Minnesota because that's where I'm originally from. But St. Paul just passed rent control last year. I'm not sure if they actually went through with it or not, but they voted it through, and there were like 6 major developments that withdrew their permits. And they're like, okay, well, this is no longer feasible. We're not going to go forward with this large development if we're going to be subject to rent control. And then they went and said anybody that already has their permits is going to be grandfathered into no rent control. And it's like, if you're having to make exceptions to the rule before the rule even starts, maybe it's not that great of a rule.
Yeah.
You know? So I don't know. But yeah, I forgot about that one. That is probably the biggest risk.
Yeah, I'll quote, or I'll tell Alex to put him in the show notes. But Jay Parsons, who's a great follow on LinkedIn, everyone should follow him. Just ton of economical data. I think Jeff was the one who got me hooked on him. But he had a study of like side by side Minneapolis and St. Paul compared to the year before and the year after, and like permit starts. And then another one, there's a few guys who are, this is a huge issue in New York City. They have rent control. And there's a few guys out there just who are putting out, spitting out some fantastic facts that like everyone needs to get there. I'll link to them in the notes as well.
My another kind of anecdote off of that, referring to New York, my family has a cabin up in northern Minnesota, and they met somebody that was out at the lake, and this guy had an apartment in New York. He's a rent-controlled apartment. He hasn't lived there in like more than 5 years, but he keeps re-signing the lease, and he subleases it and makes like a $2,000 a month profit on this apartment that he's subleasing out. And it's like, well, shouldn't that money be going to the landlord, the one that's paying the taxes and needs to renovate the unit? Like, but yeah, I mean, it's crazy, all these little situations that, a rule that on the face of it sounds good to the people, but then you get down to the nitty gritty of the actual impact, and it's not as pretty.
Yeah. All right, Mark, you ready to wrap this?
Ready to wrap.
Let's do it.
All right, James, what's your competitive advantage? How have you been able to get to where you're at this early in your career while others wish they could?
I think associating myself with the right people, and really just putting in the work. I joined a great team here with 𝗵𝘃𝗄𝗏 and Harrison and Ed. I surrounded myself with people that were really good at this job. And, I think that also being on the management side and having that experience of having hands on the ground is definitely a competitive advantage on the brokerage end of things.
Nice.
Yep. All right. What is the one piece of advice you would tell someone that has yet to buy their first property here in Chicago?
I hate to say it because it's said this feel like every time, but just do it.
Yeah.
Get out there, take a look, walk buildings, drive down the streets and get a sense for neighborhoods and where you want to be, and then make a decision. My thought process when I was buying the building is I only have so much money I can lose right now. So, if I've got to start over from zero at 23, that's not the end of the world. Not a big enough reason not to do it.
What do you do for fun?
I love being in the city here. I bike a lot, go down the lake shore on my bike, but just hanging out with friends, enjoying Chicago summer.
All right. What is a good book, podcast, or self-development activity you'd recommend to our listeners?
One that I've been listening to is it's called The Morning Brew. So it's like a morning podcast. They go over like what's going on in the world, and some economic stuff, some culture stuff. It's about 30 minutes at the start of the day, and they're out in New York. They do a pretty good job of kind of giving a high level of highlights that are happening in the world.
All right, we'll link to that in the show notes.
Besides yourself, name one resource you'd recommend to other Chicago real estate investors.
He's probably not going to like me saying this, but 𝗵𝘃𝗄𝗏. He's been a great mentor to me. He has a lot of knowledge. I've not met a single person. I can talk about I'll pull up an address, or I'll say an address to him in an area that he hasn't been in months, if not years, and he'll be like, "Oh yeah, that's the yellow brick building, the 12 unit that's on the corner." And like his knowledge of this city is unbelievable. So anything real estate, I think he's a great resource, and he can put you in touch with a great resource if he doesn't have the answer.
All right, don't Google, call Matt.
There you go. All right, James, thank you so much. You provide a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? Is there any way they can provide value to you?
I did not think about that answer. I think if you want to sell property in Chicago, let me know. If you want to talk about management or have any tips about management, that would be great as well. My contact information is on the 𝗤𝘃𝗏𝗵𝘁 website. So that's how they could get a hold of me.
All right. We got a Chicago fact. Mark, who are we playing for? Who's sponsoring this?
All right, we're playing for 𝗤𝘃𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗏. And Jay, if myself or James gets this question right, you get a $50 gift card brought to you by today's sponsor, who's Lavelle Law. So,
all right, perfect. Chance gonna have to shell out $50 here. All right, so James and I about 2 weeks ago we walked a building in Portage Park. So we'll do a Portage Park question together here. So, Mark, I don't know if you knew this, but there was a year that Portage Park actually hosted the Olympic swimming trials for the U.S. team. In what year did they host those trials? And the options are 1964, 1972, 1980, 1988.
I have
1972.
absolutely no idea.
You're gonna go 72.
Yep.
All right, James, you take a stab at it.
What
Eliminate
was that?
another one.
I'll go 80, 1980.
Mark, 72.
Bam.
Let's back into your logic there. Just pure guess, or
Well, first and foremost, Portage that was named after, isn't it like a waterway or like a separation between waterways or something like that? Isn't that what that
that was
means?
the one you asked me on? Yeah, when you interviewed me.
Okay, that's where I came from. Oh, I thought I was smart and I knew that already. I must have looked it up. Okay.
Yeah, you looked up the question.
I just know that nothing like Olympic wise happened in the 80s or 90s. I don't know why I know that, but I just know like I heard like some weird fact recently. So it had to be 64 or 72 was my thought.
All right. Well, nicely done. Lavelle lost, shelling out $50 now.
All right, Jay, man, you get a $50 gift card. Thank you. So that's awesome. All right, cool. Tom, thank you. James, thank you as always. Listeners, network. It's summer. Get out there. We got all the networking groups and functions on our list at straightupchicagoinvestor.com. If you have one that's not on there, let us know so we can add on there. It's actually, you can go right to straightupchicagoinvestor.com. Right on the homepage, it says local networking events or real estate networking events. Click on it. There's a little form. You can fill it out and you can add yours that seamlessly. So love to have it all on there. We're trying to make sure all real estate investors have all options, all different corners. So James, thank you. Tom, thank you as always. Listeners, we will see you next Thursday.
Thanks all.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Tom.